Welcome to the Salt and Light Serve Spotlight, brought to you by itsonlyhomeschooling.com, a website devoted to advocacy, community, and resources for homeschooling children with learning differences. In this podcast series, we highlight those who embody a servant's heart, individuals and organizations who are changing lives one act of service at a time. Hello everyone, and welcome to our show. My name is Kimberly Bennett, and I am your host. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for giving us a listen. A little bit about me. I am a licensed professional counselor turned homeschool mom of one. I am also an advocate for homeschooling children with learning differences. For more of my story and background, feel free to listen to episode 1 or check out my website at itsonlyhomeschooling.com. Homeschooling my child is both an honor and a privilege. Second only to parenting, it is the hardest job I have ever loved. It's a calling, a willingness to surrender and walk in obedience on a journey where I rely wholeheartedly upon the Lord's guidance of my steps and provision for my needs. I am thankful the Lord, too, provides traveling companions, support systems, and mentors to guide me and walk with me along the way. Among these blessings, I count Peggy Ployhar and her team at SPED Homeschool. June 19th through the 25th is Learning Disability Week. As a homeschool parent of a child who lives with learning differences, in our case, developmental coordination disorder and dyspraxia, and also dysgraphia, I am proud to feature as our Salt and Light Serve Spotlight for June 2023 an outstanding organization helping to empower homeschool families of diverse learners, SPED Homeschool. Families who choose to homeschool do not do so lightly. These families sacrifice careers, time, and money because they believe their children have a better future than most educational institutions are willing to help them achieve. We must empower these families to reach that goal and press forward in our efforts to make homeschooling a more accessible school choice. Peggy Ployhar, SPED Homeschool. Peggy's story is our story in many ways. She never set out to be a homeschool parent. Her early career was spent as a physicist in a comfortable paying position in corporate America. Yet, when her oldest son was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, what is now known as autism spectrum disorder, at age 5, she knew what she needed to do. She made a choice. She walked away from the white-collar world and entered the world of education. She spent the next decade working as a special needs homeschooling consultant while simultaneously home educating her own struggling learners. Peggy is the former Texas Homeschool Coalition's Special Needs Team Lead, the Minnesota Association of Christian Home Educators Special Needs Coordinator, and Mothers of Preschoolers Area Coordinator for Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. She is also certified by the American Association of Christian Counselors and trained as a Precept Bible study leader. But titles and accolades aside, when you meet Peggy, all you see is her heart, her genuine love and compassion for the special needs and learning differences community. She is the champion we need and the advocate we deserve. Humble and hardworking, she now leads an organization that empowers thousands of families across the globe each year to teach their struggling learners at home. Let's listen and learn about the wonderful resource that is SPED Homeschool. Well, good morning. I have with me today Peggy Ployhar. She is the founder and CEO of SPED Homeschool, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that offers resources to help empower families who are home educating unique learners. She is a physicist turned homeschool mom, leaving a thriving and profitable career in the private sector to teach the struggling learners in her own home after her oldest son was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome at age 5. Peggy founded SPED Homeschool in 2017, but truth be told, her experience advocating for homeschool families with special needs learners began long before her nonprofit was established. Today, she is here with us to share her story. Welcome, Peggy.
Thanks for having me, Kimberly. I'm excited to be on your show and to just share what God has taught me over the last 2 decades as I've been involved in the homeschooling special education movement.
Well, we are so excited to have you. I know I am very thrilled for you to share with our listeners of all of the exciting accomplishments that you have had with SPED Homeschool and what's going on with it and where it's going next. But tell us
Yeah.
about a little bit of your background and how SPED Homeschool came to be.
Sure. Yeah. I always joke, my people at my church when we lived in Portland, Oregon, convinced me that I needed to be a homeschool mom. And I went to a conference there and I came home. This is when my kids were toddlers and I knew nothing. And I told my husband, I said, those are not my people. I will never homeschool.
I said that
Well,
too.
God had a good giggle over that one because as
Yes.
we moved to Minnesota to being closer to family again, and my oldest was enrolled in private school, he was basically in the principal's office every day and kicked out
Oh, no.
before the end of the school year. And
Oh,
so that's when he was diagnosed on the spectrum, and he just really felt homeschooling was the only option for him. He was dealing with severe depression, and putting him in a public school with all of the potential bullying and classification, because I knew he was gifted, yet he had these social struggles, that homeschooling was the only option for us. And yet there were no resources, none at all. And I mean, people don't realize just how little there was. In the homeschooling realm, there was nothing. In even the public realm, 2 books in total existed on high functioning autism. And so I had to take really just reliance in God and trying to figure out what worked best for our family and just plod the course ahead. And so I did that for 2 years and then came on staff with the Minnesota Association of Christian Home Educators as their first struggling learner specialist. Having been in ministry prior to homeschooling, I was actually the MOPS International area coordinator. So I did leadership training over a state area. So God had kind of prepared me ahead of time for that leadership role, and then dumped me into homeschooling so I could do it there too. So he works all things out, doesn't he?
he does. He tends to do that though. But I will say, as a recent friend that I've met, Jody Ellis says to me, God's a gentleman. And
Hmm.
all he wants you to do is say yes, and then you don't have to do it in your own strength. He'll give you those little bites of that elephant at a time.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So that led me to being a consultant for many years. We moved to Texas. I worked for the Texas Homeschool Coalition, but I really found that over time, as I was answering these parents' questions, I was answering the same questions over and over again. And I was kind of feeling like a robot because, it's like these parents need to have this answer, not till I can get back to them or some other consultant can get back to them. Because as I talk to
Mm-hmm.
consultants now across the different states and even with the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, we are saying the same thing. And unfortunately, that's the firefighting phase for parents when they hit, mostly, I got to get my kid out of school, or we've
Mm-hmm.
hit a bump in the road and there's some pretty typical bumps. So I just really prayed into that. And in 2017, the very first part of the year, God had me buy a URL. And the URL I bought was SPED Homeschool. And I had no idea what I was going to use this URL for, actually. I thought, well, okay, I'm going to write a blog. I'm going to, I don't know. And as I kept praying and kept seeking, God opened some doors that the Texas Homeschool Coalition needed to make some budget cuts. And I said, at the night before, God actually revealed to me that he wanted me to create a nonprofit. And so it was just perfect timing. And it was like I came into this budget cut meeting with the Texas Homeschool Coalition, and they said, okay, well, your assistant costs less, so we'll hold on to her. And plus, she speaks Spanish. And I was like, hallelujah, let me go. And they said, and you can take your Facebook group and your Pinterest page and everything you've created under us. And we want to see you be successful in this to continue answering those questions that families need to have answered that goes beyond the scope of what a consultant can provide them. And so that's where SPED Homeschool came from. It was just out of a lot of prayer and the need to create this resource library online through our videos and podcasts and blogs so that parents can search, because we reach such a large spectrum of families that go all the way from struggling learner in math or reading to very profound disabilities, and God's given me a view into all of that through various things. My own children who have been kind of the twice exceptional types of learners, but also I'm the oldest of 14. I have 10 adopted siblings, all with special needs, and so my parents actually started homeschooling after I did. They saw the success in my own home, and they still have 2 at home. My parents are almost 80, and they'll be coming back into homeschooling. They tried the public school again this year. It's due to some health issues, but now they're actually hiring a private tutor for my youngest 2 siblings next year. So yeah, I've had this wealth of experience that I've been able to just pour into this ministry and to get to lead it in a way of understanding, but also compassion and empathy from my own experiences too.
Oh, wow. I'm almost at a loss for words for that. I literally am just listening to everything that you're saying, and God guided your steps from childhood to this
Yeah.
point. I know
Yeah.
there's a mention of your career as a physicist once in the medical device industry prior, but I
Yeah.
think that was just a sidebar. This is really where you were meant to be when you came back into this. He
Yeah.
put
The
people
funny
in
thing
your
about the
path.
physicist part, yeah, is that my son is now in biomedical engineering, which is the field I used to be in. He's my oldest and
Of
he's
course he
graduated.
is.
And so, yes, so he's
Of
continuing
course he
that
is.
strain for me. But
Well,
yeah,
now that explains the sidebar too. God's like, oh, no, you're
yeah,
going to need this later. So,
right, exactly. To teach him calculus when he's 16. So, yes.
yes. So glad my husband's an engineer. That is not a strength for
Right,
me.
yes.
So, but it's okay. I
Hmm.
can handle all the writing.
Good, because that's I couldn't. I didn't even know what the word phonics was when I started homeschooling, and I was like, okay, God, if you can use this, teach me how to teach my kids to read. We all survived.
My husband didn't either. He didn't learn that. He's an army brat, so he grew up everywhere. So that's not at that time. And 80s kids were
Right.
80s kids. That
Yeah.
wasn't there
No.
for him. So he learned
Exactly.
differently. But that's
Yeah.
okay. The beauty of homeschool is you can. And we have
Yes. So
a
true.
ton of options now, but
Yeah.
not everyone is aware of those options. And
Yeah.
your organization is doing a phenomenal job of reaching out. I'm kind of like you in the homeschool community pages that I see on Facebook. Parents are asking those same questions over and over, and it
Yeah.
is wonderful to go to one place. And once you go to your website, though, it's almost like you fall down a beautiful rabbit hole of resources that you don't want to leave. You're like, oh, what is this? What is this?
Right.
And
Yes. Yeah.
it's
And we've been kind
amazing,
of
and it's
modifying that a little bit. We had some changes on our website. We're not listing specific curriculum companies, therapists of that anymore, but we have a page that has free downloads now, and we're building
mhm.
journeys off of those downloads. The first one was just built this past weekend. So if you download our homeschool IEP and guide, we will actually send you a series of emails over a week that walk you through step by step step of that process. And we'll be doing that for the rest of them too, of the downloads that we'll be putting on there. We have new ones coming out, like how to get through high school. And because we really want to walk alongside you, but we know that
Yes.
technology will allow us to do that without having, because we just don't have the funds and the overhead to have
Sure.
individuals to do that. We can, connect you up with somebody. We have a large network of people that we know, but this is one way that you can kind of do it almost self-paced and get
Hmm.
to that
Hmm.
spot where you want to be, instead of us just dumping stuff on you and saying good luck. And so that's kind of how we're coming alongside a little more purposefully as we're moving through this transition.
Well, you'll reach a wider audience and a broader audience that way too,
Yes.
myself included. I will
Hmm.
say, small sidebar, my background is in therapy. I'm an LPC. And my son, even though we knew he has dysgraphia, that was only
Right.
recently diagnosed though. He has DCD as well and sensory processing disorder. Long story
Okay.
short, and it wasn't until I watched a couple of your videos where, with your empowering homeschool conversations,
Yes.
where you were speaking, I forgot which one it was now, but I'll be honest, it was speaking to the importance of, even though we live in Texas, it's a very free state. It's hands
Right.
off. We have the freedom,
Yep.
that you're speaking to the importance of having an IEP, even if you don't
Yes.
technically have to have one. So now,
Hmm.
for the first time, I am learning how to write an IEP. And I'm very
Ah.
grateful for the resources because I knew he needed one. It made me think of it in terms of the long term. My son is 10,
Right.
so he's still young. We are in a university model school program right now, and they are accommodating. They are wonderful. They are willing to give him what he needs, and but he won't be there forever. He will graduate and go to college, and I
Right.
have to remember that if he is thriving using these accommodations, well, he's going to probably need them when it's time for college. And if I don't have this
Exactly.
documented, if it's not written down, it didn't happen.
Hmm.
um, he's not going to be able to use these accommodations when he goes to
That's so true.
college. So I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I need to do this. Your resource provides a hand holding for me that I need right now. So I
Yeah.
think that's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. It's something we've really figured out. Just nonprofits across the board are seeing a downturn in their funding. And so we've had to really
Yes.
pray into, how do we keep pursuing the mission and giving parents the resources that we need and making cuts where cuts are necessary. Um, and God was very clear on that, and so this is kind of how this has progressed. But that's, and it seems like if you go to our website, like you said, we have lots of things. You fall down this rabbit hole, it can become overwhelming too, and we didn't want that to happen either. And so this is, hopefully will help parents to find the resources that they need, know that there's other stuff out there, but they can leave it there and it'll be there when they
Yes.
need it, to come back. Yeah.
Well, even though there is a wealth of information there, I personally, for me, every personality is different, but I felt it to be empowering and encouraging. But I also have to remember I'm not completely new to this. I'm always going to be a little bit of a newbie because, as we joke, we have one, so he's always the practice kid. We're always
Yes.
learning something with him, even though every child is different. But I found it to be incredibly comforting because it is manageable chunks of information,
Yes, we make
and
sure the blogs can be read in 2 to 5 minutes. We don't, they're
yes.
not super lengthy. They have lots of bullet points, lots of links you can go to so you don't have to search for things. Yeah, we try to make it as user friendly. We know what it's like to be in your home. And
Yes.
so we come from that perspective, and the people that we work with, we try to advocate a lot for this community within the broader um, sphere of homeschoolers, because a lot of people
Mhm.
don't understand how difficult it is and the other things that families have to deal with, including the medical issues that they have going on in their homes, and just schedule conflicts, therapy, all those other things that we build into our
Mm.
days that typical homeschoolers do not.
Yes.
And curriculum companies need to be reminded of that. People who do
Mm.
conferences need to be reminded of that. um,
Yes.
And so that I've taken on, and I love to be able to advocate for our community in that sphere, because I've found that people have started listening to me, and I know they don't always listen to every parent that talks to them about these things, but they know I have a large community behind me now, and that
Mhm.
we make up close to, now they say, almost 50% of the homeschooling community has at least one struggling learner in their home. And
Wow.
so yeah, there's just a lot, and the majority of people who chose to stay homeschooling since the pandemic um, have been ones whose child did not receive proper accommodations in the public school. So our community has increased tremendously since COVID,
Mhm.
and they now, a lot of people recognize that we are the largest growing population of homeschoolers out there.
Yes, we are. Absolutely. I know it was, we homeschooled prior to the pandemic, but it was definitely the major driving force in our
Hmm.
decision to homeschool.
Yeah,
DCD, or developmental coordination disorder, is not very commonly known this side of the pond, if you will, but it
yeah.
is actually very a common diagnosis.
Hmm.
And it's hit or miss where you can get accommodations for it. It's very rare. I've seen that you can get an IEP for it. You're lucky if you get a 504, but then you're also very lucky with what tools you will be given or what
Wow.
accommodations you will be given, even if you are lucky enough to fall under the umbrella of IDEA. But it is hit or miss, and it was a huge. I worked in public education for about a decade as a guidance counselor, never taught, but I kind of knew that it wasn't going to happen. So it was
Right.
a major influence in our decision to homeschool. And I can see how that would be for other parents as well in growing,
Yep.
especially
Yeah.
when you live in a state like ours where there's such freedom for it.
Hmm.
At the same time, you're also speaking to how it can be incredibly intimidating if you have a child who struggles with other learning needs and learning differences, and you are providing a wealth of information and support and community. More than anything, community is so vastly important
It
because
is. Yes. Yeah. We've been diving into that and praying just how God wants us to continue to expand that sphere. Right now we had a family camp last year. It was our
yes.
first camp on site with families that drove to Minnesota, all the way from Florida, Indiana, Illinois,
Oh,
lots from Minnesota. And so that camp will be in August again this next year, God willing. We have some funding that has to come in the next couple of weeks. I told my team, you've got to pray that God is going to provide in tremendous ways if He wants this to happen. But we are also, we did a survey of our community and asked really what they wanted, and we're praying into doing a way to help families to build their own support networks. It was something that I ended up doing when I was homeschooling my own kids, because I really didn't have a co-op or anything my kids could go to. So we built what now is called a pod, but yeah, I guess I was before my time, but but it was a way to build community for me, to have other friends, and to build friendships, my kids to build friendships in a safe environment, and then learn together. And so I'm kind of praying into to some ideas involving that, and helping our families to develop those own resources within their own communities, so that they just feel confident about making those connections, and then how do we sustain this. So yeah, but yeah, virtual communities are wonderful, but really we
Mhm.
don't, when we need to get vulnerable, we need to have those people that we can have around us when times are good and times are bad. And so equipping our families with that skill, because it is a skill that many of us are not even taught
Mhm.
anymore, and we don't talk to our
True.
neighbors. We don't have those close friends. We have our Facebook friends, but that is not going to sustain you through the hard times. And
No.
so that has just been something heavy on my heart lately, that we need to kind of dive into. But God willing, that will happen. And we saw that happen at camp. We saw families come together that didn't know each other, that now are best friends, and they have been
Oh, that's
supports for one another over this past year. And we're just praying for more of that. because that's, now that we have the resources really established, my podcast is available. The website's up there. There are some tweaks and changes, but really that community base, that really is what sustains us in the long run.
It absolutely is. Tell us more about this camp, this wonderful camp.
Yeah, so it's uh, I last year we had partnered with the Ministry of Johnny and Friends, and it's very close to a typical model of their family camp. But it's all for homeschoolers affected by disability, and we do not say that it's just the child of the family that needs to have the disability. It could also be a parent. So we had one mother with MS that came with her 8
Okay.
children last year. And these families just can't take vacations without help. And
Right.
so a lot of times they just need respite, they need fun, they need connections, and they need to just be renewed in their faith. And so that's kind of what we do, all in a nutshell, within a week's time. And so this camp is just south of Rochester, Minnesota, by the Mayo Clinic, and it's on a private Christian camp. The founder is actually paraplegic, and he built this camp on his parents' land. He'd always want to build a camp, but once he was in a wheelchair, he realized he wanted a wheelchair accessible camp. And so everything in this
Mm-hmm.
camp is wheelchair accessible, including the equestrian facility that they have on site. And they have a petting zoo. There's a lodge with 20 different unique suites. So we can put different families in different suites depending on their size. They can all be together. They accommodated our array of dietary needs last year in incredible ways. Um, and so we bring in volunteers too. Volunteers come in as short-term missionaries, and they serve these families. They get paired up with a family or two, um, and so then those families have the assistance that they need in order to have fun and to just relax. We had a family come last year who even said, we brought grandma and grandpa because they're our normal second caregivers, and grandma and
Mm-hmm.
grandpa ended up having fun too because they weren't needed to caregive.
That is
They
a
actually were able to
wonderful
take time to
blessing.
be with their other grandkids that they usually
Yeah.
don't spend as much time with, because they're the one daughter, the one grandchild required so much extra help. And actually, we ended up having to put 2 volunteers on that one child just to ensure that this family had a good time. But it was so well worth um, that that focused attention, because this family got something they'd never had before. The mom even told me, after we had a pool party the first night, and she pulled me and some other of the leaders aside and said, even if we have to leave tomorrow morning, this was the best vacation we've ever had. And they ended up
Oh,
staying the whole week, and they signed up first thing. They were the first family to sign up for this year's camp, and it meant the world to them. And we've heard
yeah.
that from so many other families. And it's a picture of inclusion that you don't see in this world usually, because
You
when
don't.
you took a step back, you couldn't tell who had a disability and who didn't. Everybody was just having fun. When we had the big water slide, there's a giant water slide, and everybody was out there. They were cheering each other on and going down this water slide, and some of them just got going so fast they went right into the mud at the end.
Oh.
So we have videos on
Well,
our
that could be
YouTube
fun
channel.
too.
Yeah, you'll have to look at them. It was quite wild, but
Oh, I'll
we were
put
able to.
cards for that and everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyways, that's a little bit about that camp. And we just really strive to help these families to have the vacation that is just meaningful and restful, and rejuvenating to them and their faith, and just their homeschooling and their journey in general that they have ahead.
How can our audience or listeners or just anyone who might be hearing our voices now or watching this video on YouTube, how can they help support families or support SPED Homeschool for funding for those camps?
Yeah, you can go to our family camp page. If you go to our our website, there's a button for resources, and Family Camp is one of those colorful buttons. There's actually individual giving pages on that page for volunteers and families in need. And if you just want to make a general donation for a scholarship, you can go to our donate page on our website and then just put in the tagline where you want it to go. You can make a general contribution. Otherwise, you can say family scholarships, and we'll apply it to the camp from there. But those are just two ways. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, we will definitely get the word out about that camp.
Thank you.
Okay. Close to 50% of homeschoolers have some form of learning difference. If that does not convince you of the value of SPED Homeschool as a free resource, I do not know what will. SPED Homeschool is a mission field, providing resources and connecting families through the comfort of community. Sadly, at the airing of this episode, Family Camp for the 2023 season was canceled due to lack of funding. Listeners, I have a request as your humble host. Would you come together with me in prayer for the future of not only these beautiful camps of fun and respite, but also for the future of SPED Homeschool? To learn more about ways you can support this education ministry, visit Peggy's website at www.spedhomeschool.com. Be sure to tune into episode 19, airing on Wednesday, June 28th, where we continue our conversation with Peggy. We will learn more about the future for SPED Homeschool. With the It's Only Homeschooling podcast, we invite your family to join ours for life lessons beyond the classroom. Through our Salt and Light Serve Spotlight series, we hope to inspire others to answer the call of service. We hope you'll make us one of your regular stops along the way in your homeschool adventures. Remember, education is a journey, not a destination. Until we meet again, take a deep breath and relax. It's only homeschooling.
Playing show and tell.